that often you hear people say it's a basket case. It is, and it's because of the lack of the human dignity that you know should be given to these human beings down there. It's not recognized. Quite often, think about it. The only times you hear Africa being mentioned is, in connection with the usual stories and images that we see. Negatives. That's when they are included in the world. Lots of these very good-hearted celebrities who have often fought on behalf of the Africans who are very well to do in terms of finances, who are very known and powerful, can pull strings. Most of these ones are musicians, rock stars. How often, when you see their programs, how often do you hear that they are going on world tours, and they include Africa? This is just a question. I'm only asking. How often do you hear? I'm sure that Africans are also interested in music. Isn't it so? The point I'm trying to make here is that it is very, very important to recognize the damage that the lack of recognizing the human dignity for the African is doing. The consequences is irreversible. It is very, very important that even the poor, defenseless, dirty-looking individual crawling on the ground is a human being and must be addressed and treated with human dignity. How often does that happen? Again, like I said, when the world is mentioned, the world, in other words, North America, South America, Asia, and so on, you very rarely hear them mention Africa. The international media rarely mentions Africa in connection with anything positive around the world. A couple of weeks ago I heard the United States President Obama addressing a rally or something, and I think he was being questioned, and he was trying to give an example of a situation, and he said, I'm sure if you look around the world, North America, South America, Asia, the Middle East, you will, and then he went on to finish his sentence, and I'm like, hey, the man forgot to mention the continent of Africa. When the mass migration started to Europe or into Europe, this was a serious issue for the governments in Europe. They had to do something. They had to do something to appease their citizens because it was getting out of hand. And they had been talking about wanting to do so much, wanting to do that, but it looked like the situation was very, very difficult to handle. But they had to do something. The German chancellor, for one, she just said, open the gates and let them come in. The government of Sweden also embraced the refugees. And this was a serious issue then and now. And I remember very, very well that the leaders of these European countries had to do something. They had to do something to prove to their citizens that they are taking action, because they had been meeting often here and there, and there wasn't any proper solution coming out. And I remember they all of a sudden called for an emergency summit. I think it was in Cyprus, or was it Malta? One of these. And the interesting thing about this urgency was to act on a particular issue amongst this, getting out of hand situation with the migration. And what was it? Well, your guess is as good as mine. They realized that most of these migrants were dark-skinned people from Sub-Saharan African countries. And who wants them? Who wants them in the midst of our developed societies here? They're primitive, they are barbaric, they are uneducated, they are the mannerisms and all that. Oh, we don't want them. So the leaders hurriedly had this summit and had invited the leaders of the African countries. Oh my goodness. And in the coming segments, I'm going to also mention about the leaders in the African countries. And as you well know, they wanted these leaders of the African countries to come over quickly so they can offer them some sort of a deal, and convince them to take their citizens back to their African countries. And you know very well that the leaders of the African countries, they will just jump at the opportunity to take in any money. So there was this meeting, and as naively as these European leaders are, I don't know what the consequences became, but this tells you that whenever any action has to be taken, or rather whenever or when the important action had to be taken, they looked away from the massive influx coming in from Turkey at the time over Croatia. And they realized there was not much they could do, but they had to do something. And how well to do it than to capitalize on the weak and the defenseless, and that was the Africans. They had to go. They had to go. And this, is an example of you know, the lack of human dignity for the dark-skinned population from sub-Saharan Africa. And another point that I want to make before I forget is, in most of the sub-Saharan African countries, there is this tradition that, and because of the tribal denominations, there is this tradition that if someone from your tribe, gets into a place of authority and high position, they can use their influence to the benefit of their tribe. So when people are elected into offices, their tribes folks expect something positive from them. And I can remember when the U.S. president was elected, U.S. President Obama was elected, how thrilled many from his father's country of Kenya were, along with many other dark-skinned people from the African continent, because it was an achievement, as they had been looked down upon for so long. So I can understand. And I remember recently in his last visit in his last visit to Kenya, the U.S. President Obama's last visit to Kenya, he obviously was invited to the Kenyan Parliament to give a speech, and I heard something he said, and I don't know what to make of it. I thought, how serious is this? I remember his quotation: "I didn't come to Africa because of my roots. I came to Africa because Africa is on the march." And I'm like, is this man serious? Africa is on the march 2016? I'm sorry, but this tells me that there is no apparent recognition for the dark-skinned people on the African continent. Because you and I know very well that the situation for most of the dark-skinned populated countries in Africa south of the Sahara are having it very, very bad. It's so bad that for anyone to say otherwise is a direct lack of respect for the human beings down there. So this some food for thought. And I'm sure you see me again in the next segment. Thank you for listening.